That's going to be a tricky exercise. But what we see increasingly is that, of course, we bring all of who we are to the task of teaching, and that becomes quite, I think, another set of issues for us to think about separating out and working through that professional life. Is this making any sense to you? Is it touching some chords with you? Okay, so I wanted to just in passing, by the way, this question of discipline, when I was researching this stuff and having a look, I thought, isn't this one of the areas that the concept of what a good teacher is has changed dramatically in a fairly short period of time, actually, with notions of corporal punishment being totally appropriate. And I loved that photo when I found it of the role of the teacher in that case. And now notions of discipline are about cooperative discipline, of course, rather than, and I'm hoping that none of this happens in your classrooms, of course, childhood teachers in particular. So I want to have a look at another movie, one that I'm sure you'll know, Dead Poets Society, because I thought it was, in some ways, it was showing us some of the same characteristics of what the teacher is, how the teacher is represented. This is highly individual, a bit eccentric, you know, a bit out there. But the element that I thought was introduced in this representation was being passionate about the subject matter. Hands up if you have not seen this one. I'm assuming most people have seen it. Never seen Dead Poets Society? Well, okay. It's certainly worth a look. Would the rest of you say that? Is it worth a look?
Yeah.
If you're a teacher, yeah, it's worth a look. And the other one that I thought was like this, where the teacher is really passionate about the subject and what they do, was that one called Mr. Howard's Opus. The music teacher. Mr. Holland's Opus, thank you. That's the John Howard's play. That's terrible. Now I'll never be able to think about it. Mr. Holland's Opus, where he was very passionate about music with the students. So this one, I'll just get you to have a look at this. And when you, the question I raise here that I find a bit troubling is one that I encountered as a teacher educator, where quite a few student teachers over the years of my working with them were a bit needy themselves. And I thought that when they were going into classrooms, it was more about them and what they could get from the students rather than what they could do for the students and with the students. So there was always that, just with a few students, that worried me. And when I look back at this one, I'm thinking, is this what we're seeing in this movie? That when I looked at the popularity stakes in America, this one, Dead Poets Society, comes up as the #1 most popular movie about teachers for so many people. So it's hitting some chords with the way a lot of people think about the teacher. Just have a quick look at this little snip. You probably remember it if you've seen the movie. Denise can't sway that or not.
Why do I stand up here? Anybody?
To feel taller.
No. Thank you for playing, Mr. Dalton. I stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in a different way. See, the world looks very different from up here. You don't believe me? Come see for yourselves. Come on. Come on. Just when you think you know something, you have to look at it in another way. Even though it may seem silly or wrong, you must try. Now, when you read, don't just consider what the author thinks. Consider what you think. Boys, you must strive to find your own voice. Because the longer you wait to begin, the less likely you are to find it at all. Thoreau said most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Don't be resigned to that. Break out. Don't just walk off the edge like lemmings. Look around you. There you go, Mr. Christie. Thank you. Yes. Dare to strike out and find new ground. Now, in addition to your essays, I would like you to compose a poem of your own, an original work. That's right. You have to deliver it aloud in front of the class on Monday. Bonne chance, gentlemen. Mr. Anderson, don't think that I don't know that this assignment scares the hell out of you, you mole.
Okay. I'll put these two questions up, and I'd like to sort of divide the room in two. So people sitting, let's draw a line up here. So people sitting on that side, I'd like you to look at number one, do experts make the best teachers, and just have a chat about that. And the second one, the second half, the people over here, I'd like you to look at that question too, that there's no such thing as a good teacher, it's really just good students. And when I looked at To Serve with Love and Dead Poets Society, the thing that really struck me was the difference in the students. The students in Dead Poets Society, you can tell, fairly privileged children, they're all male, they're all from, you'd have to think, from upper middle class families, whereas the children in To Serve with Love, the opposite of that. And the other example that I always think about and use with my student teachers as well about good student, bad student is The Simpsons, where I guess we would all love to have a class full of Lisa Simpsons, wouldn't we? And our worst nightmare would be to have a class full of Bart Simpsons, you know, they epitomise the good and bad students. So think about the students that you teach on a daily basis and think about whether they're good or bad students. And I'm sure that we've all encountered students who would effectively teach themselves, that there's very little that, you know, we're there almost as a prompt, we're almost incidental, that particularly now with the amount of the volumes of information that are available to all of us, then sometimes you think that these students could just, you know, just keep them happy for a bit, feed them and they'll educate themselves. So have a little chat and see what you decide about these questions, please. Same format, you get what I mean, just chat amongst yourselves and I'll ask people to make comment. Thank you.
I don't think that's really the best teachers. That are engaged. Do you want a class of students that engage in the class? Do you want a class of students? No. But if they're
Uncle's got love and his parents were getting more and more embarrassed. And at the last,
they've got a different view of that.
and I think they felt like the
Cherish someone with holidays. Totally, you know. And even it's just okay, you know, and I said he's the sort of kid who's going to go to places, you know, because he's got energy and he's
But because they'll just go even all that he just talking to himself that he understood, but the children may not understand.
Does everyone else think?
Sure.
So I suppose you could say that his expertise can hold
The best teachers. Yeah? What about this group? Can you give us a couple of ideas that you came up with?
We said not necessarily. We've all taken kids on excursions and things like that where the expert has addressed them and have had very little impact on them. So we said if it was an expert teacher who was an expert in their area, that's a real win-win. You know, kids pick up very quickly when a teacher does not know the content and can't take them to that next level, and they see it and they can verbalise it and they can become very disengaged, and they know why they're disengaged.
Yeah, they're very astute, which is one of the scary things. We shouldn't be saying this to someone who's just about to start teaching children. We don't want to scare you. And I think when you start teaching, it is one of the things you're very nervous about, is that kids will ask you a question and you'll look dumb. You'll look like you've been exposed as being a bit of a fake. I guess the flip of this, though, is to think, well, let's hear what the rest of you said. With other comments from the group down the front here, perhaps. Do you would like to comment?
It's really along similar lines.
Okay.
The expert doesn't automatically become a good teacher.
So I think we've probably all had the experience of an expert who in fact was a lousy teacher. So when you start to think about that, you think, well, what is it then? That's the gap. So this comes back to exposing for us the question, what is it then that makes for the good teacher? We know it when we don't see it, don't we? We know it when it's not happening, that's for sure. But I think, you know, your point is absolutely right. You need some level of expertise in order to be able to teach. Although, I question that too, because I can remember, I remember when I first started teaching at university and preparing for my first tutorial, I was so frightened by the fact that there would be students there who would be much smarter than me, and that there would be somehow, particularly when you work with young children, when you work with teenagers as well, you can always comfort yourself that you do know a bit more and you're a bit smarter and you've been on the planet a bit longer in any event. But all of a sudden, when you see, it's a bit like me standing in front of you, when I know that many of you will be smarter and know more things and know different things from me, then the question of expertise is not what it's about then. It's more about the sharing, I think, that goes on then. But it is still pretty confronting because you want to have the confidence of a patch of expertise as well when you're teaching. So I hope I'm not, what I'm trying to do with these little breaks in the movies is to clarify for all of us as we go through what it is that we think makes a good teacher. But probably in the process, I'm just making it messier as well. And one of my heroes in teacher education is a man called Ken Zeitner, who's a professor of education at University of Wisconsin in Madison. And that's what he said, that the closer you look at something, the messier it gets. And I think in our heads sometimes there's the notion that if we spend more time on it and read more about it and think more about it, then it will become clearer. But what in fact we do is recognise the complexities. And if there's one thing we can be definite about teaching is that it's complex, yes? I think we'd all agree with that. Okay, what about the second question, that there's no such thing as a good teacher, there are just good students? Again, well, this time let's start at the back. This group, what did you think?
We questioned what a good student is.
Ah, nice. And what did you decide?
We decided that it didn't necessarily correlate with a student that was obliging or,
Not Lisa Simpson.
No. We felt that a good student was a student that questioned and they had a little bit of energy and enthusiasm towards learning, not just that compliance. We tend to think good students is
It's, this again is one of those questions that's worth unpicking. I think it's really important for all of us to think about what we think of as a good teacher. I can remember working with some new tutors in the university who were teaching for the very first times in their lives. And I gave them what I thought would be some problem situations. So I said to them, what do you do if you go into a group and they're absolutely silent? There's no response. And some of the tutors said, what's the problem with that? And I thought, yeah, what I was doing was imposing my values, which were that the good student is the student who is going to be responsive and interactive and do what you're doing with me now. You're looking and you're nodding and you're indicating to me that you're with it. So unpick for yourselves what the notion of a good student is for you, I think, because I think it's quite telling then about what our concept of a good teacher is. So when you tell me that the good student is the student who asks questions, who isn't passive, who does have some energy, I think you're also telling me a fair bit about what your concept of the good teacher is too. That you're going to elicit that, you're going to set up environments where that's safe and okay, and so that's a good teacher.
Like in what Robin Williams was saying to his students, you read something, you don't just read it, you have to think about it and form your own opinion of it.
Okay.
He was opening that door to his students, that it's not just I'm telling you or you listen to me, it's this chemistry of think, reflect, question.
Sure. And again, you're telling me what the good teacher is. What would have happened if we took Robin Williams and put him in the context of To Serve with Love?
Chaos.
Okay. So again, I think that exposes something, doesn't it? It's interesting, and probably one of the things we're going to want to say about the good teacher is that we're adaptable. That if you're a good teacher, you'll work with the sorts of students who are in To Serve with Love, and you'll work with the students who are in, and that's what you do. It's the love the ones you're with. Yeah, you do need a different recipe. So this is the cook working with the ingredients. So these are the ingredients, if you like, if we want to go back to that analogy. So thank you. So I think we're making things a bit muddier as we go. I want to go back. Some of you will have already heard me speak about this, but as I look through these questions of teaching and learning over the times that I've been looking, I'm convinced by the work that Clendenin and Connolly did when they talked about there just being two major mindscapes around teaching and learning. And the two, I just want to very briefly have a look at these with you. One is the notion of the teacher as transmitter of knowledge. So you know this stuff, that the teacher is the expert that you talked about before, that you've got a whole lot of stuff in your head and that you transmit it like a radio station, you transmit it out, and these very receptive students who are keen to learn take it all in, absorb the facts that come from your head, they go into their head, and sometime later the students deliver exactly the same facts. It's a very neat process, and it seems so silly, but it so underpins so much of what we do in classrooms, except probably for early childhood teachers, who I think didn't ever buy this, because the students didn't, 4-year-olds didn't. I think we socialised a lot of our students further on so that they did take that. But that view of the teacher as a transmitter of knowledge gives teaching, good teaching, looks like this, yes? And I'm not saying that this doesn't count, because I think it does count. I think there are contexts in which it is very important to get the facts straight, to think of the sequence that they need to be in so that the students are likely to get them, and to deliver the message clearly. I think it's important. So that's the other messy thing about this. Just when I think I'm saying to you, no, that's not good enough, we need a bit of this too, don't we? We need a bit of transmission skill, I think. And of course, all the work that's been done on constructivism has shown it, that that's not the way any human beings learn, is straight, unmediated facts. It is what we're talking about, what Robert Williams was talking about, is take it from your perspective, get involved yourself, you're in there with it. So under that view, the teacher as the co-constructor, good teaching is quite different from the view of the transmitter. And what you might want to think about is the good teacher works out which of these modes they need to go into on which occasions, and can swing easily amongst the different modes. Okay, I just then wanted to before I do a quick dip into the literature, I just wanted to talk about this view, which is a developmental view of what a good teacher is. This is work that's been done in the last 10 years or so about the context of university teaching. And this was seen as developmental. Now, those of you, particularly the early childhood teachers here, will know the work of Lillian Katz, yes, about the going from novice to expert. Some of you might have seen the early work that was done by Fuller and Bown as well, about the novice teacher to the expert teacher. And some of the things they identified in our development in experience was that when we start off, so I'm now talking about the school context. What I have up on the slide is the university teaching context. But in the school context, the notion was that when we start teaching, we're mostly concerned about ourselves. We're concerned about getting it right, about getting our voice pitched properly, about knowing stuff so we're not shown up, as we've mentioned before. And then as we get that all under control and know we can work the technology and use the whiteboard and do the things you need to do, we then start to shift our attention to the students. And then we start to shift our attention to all the other bits and pieces that make it work. And the work that they've done, the researchers have done around novice to expert, does that sort of shift. It also says that when we start as school teachers, we are very governed by rules. We have a particular way we like to approach things. And as we become more experienced, we can be more relaxed about what the rules are. We become more flexible in the ways we deal with things. And that intuitively makes a bit of sense, doesn't it? This work, I think, has also got something to recommend it to us too. I found this quite a useful thing to look at. And when I thought back to the work I've done when I've been working with student teachers and with practitioners, what happens at the university level is university lecturers often say the problem is with the students. And the problem is that we now let people into uni who shouldn't be here. And the real problems lie with the secondary school teachers. They don't give them the basic literacy skills that they need. Students come to us and they can't do any, they've got very poor numeracy skills. I work with secondary school teachers, and secondary school teachers say, it's primary school teachers. They come to us and they haven't got the basics in place. We blame the people down the food chain. You work with early childhood teachers and the naughty ones say it's the parents' fault. The parents didn't read to the children, or the parents didn't feed them the right food, or whatever it might be. These children know no discipline. So there's always that, there's the question of attribution about a good teacher. Do you attribute to yourself when your students do exceptionally well? When I watch graduates of our teacher ed program go out and do wonderful teaching, I can't help but feel a bit of pride and think, well, I had a part in that, I was clever. But it's a bit tricky, isn't it, working out then if they're awful and I go and see them and they're doing terrible things with students, do I then attribute that to me as well? So working out attribution, where you attribute responsibility as a teacher, I think it's a tricky one. Do you struggle with that a bit? How much of it can you claim for yourself in what you do? How much of it is just out there in the universe? I think it's one of the issues we need to look at. And this developmental one says that we start off blaming the students. And then we go through a patch of saying, oh my God, it's all my fault, I've done badly, I'll never do this job, I'm hopeless at it, I should have been a plumber, whatever it might be, until it's the coming to terms with the conditions of the job and then setting about constructing the learning environment, doing what you can to make it work as well as you can, is what the suggestion is from them. Now, what I'm going to do, you're very cold, and I see lots of you sitting there going like this, so I'm sorry about that. What I'm going to do is just do something really silly, really, because I'm going to look at about 50 years of literature on what constitutes a good teacher, and I'm going to do it in about 5 slides. Okay, so, but necessarily, it's pretty simplistic stuff. But I can give these slides to Margaret, and if any of you want to follow